12 o'clock on your Wednesday. Welcome in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head. Terry Ford will be along with me as he typically is after a few minutes here. Plenty to dive into. Going to reassess the 12-team college football playoff, kind of see how that would have shook out in previous years if we'd had the expanded format as we get set to enter that realm of the unknown once again in college football as we expand to 12 teams from 4 this upcoming season. I mentioned a little bit earlier, think about the Rose Bowl and them trying to get there or trying to solidify their original or their historical date and time of January the 1st at 5 p.m. Eastern time. We'll dive back into that a little bit more later on the show probably, but it's an ever-present topic of conversation, the college football playoff is, because it continues to shift and move around. I mean, we're going into this year of the 12-team college football playoff for the first time, already kind of looking ahead to what that next change is going to be. And I know Rich Clark, who's the executive director of the CFP, when he was out at SEC Media Days a week ago, did kind of try and downplay a little bit of what the expansion to 14 or 16 could be by saying they're going to wait to assess things until after the season. But everything we've heard up to this point is that there's already a strong push on things to get expanded even more, in the very near future, whether it be the 14 or 16, because, of course, guess what? That generates more money because you're playing more games and so on and so forth, which we know is going to expand at some point. It's just a matter of if, not necessarily when. And as Rich Clark said, they're going to evaluate things after the season, where I'd not be surprised if by 2026 we're already playing in an expanded college football playoff. So again, we'll get into plenty of that as the show goes along. But we sit here today just 38 days away from the start of South Carolina's season as they get set to take on Old Dominion in week number 1. 31 days if you're a believer like me in week 0. I know our guy Wes Mitchell, as we just talked about in the last hour, does not believe in week 0, does not, understand week 0 the way that we do. But I'm in the camp of if football's on TV, I want to watch football. I will watch NFL preseason games just purely because it's football. You know what I mean? You don't have to invest in it. You don't have to pay attention to every single detail. But just having football on TV is certainly going to be a welcome sight. And for college football specifically, we are right at a month away until we see the likes of Florida State and Notre Dame kicking things off in Ireland for that week 0 contest. And of course we get the full slate of games in week number 1, which of course includes South Carolina and Old Dominion. And I was looking at the schedule a bit earlier. We get games starting that Thursday as well as far as the SEC. So you'll get Arkansas at Arkansas Pine Bluff. You'll get Missouri taking on the Fighting Jody Wrights of Murray State on Thursday as well. Which is FCS opponents. We think those teams should win those games pretty handily, but you never know. And again, it at least provides some interesting content on seeing what Arkansas and Missouri are going to be respectively. Oklahoma is going to take on Temple that Friday night at 7 o'clock on ESPN, so you get your first glimpse of Oklahoma and their stadium out there in Norman with the SEC logos on the field. And then obviously we hit the ground running on that Saturday with a full day of games, which Carolina and Old Dominion will fall right in the middle of that mysterious 4:15 kickoff on the SEC network, where I can tell you one thing, it's going to be hot. So go ahead and start hydrating and putting on your sunscreen now, because that first game, probably not going to see the sunset if it wraps up in about 3 hours, but going to be a hot one to start off the season, and we'll get some kind of insight into what this team's going to be, and hopefully that is the start of a season that at least gets you back to a bowl game. But we'll learn more about this team as the certainly as the weeks go by. But to be cliche here, got to start off 1-0, take it one game at a time, and beat Old Dominion 38 days from now.
I think that one's okay.
I feel pretty confident, and I don't mean to disrespect the Monarchs, but I feel like South Carolina can beat the team that lost the famous Toastery Bowl from last year.
I think you're correct. And really, no one's picking them to go to a bowl game at all this year. They got a lot of stuff going on with, losing players and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, you feel pretty good about that one. You feel pretty good about Akron, Wofford,
and honestly,
Vanderbilt.
I'm glad Carolina has a quote-unquote cupcake first game.
Yeah.
Because if we were going into this year, we felt pretty good about the North Carolina game last year. You got Rattler returning, Juice Wells was coming back, felt good about what he had on defense, and that guy went completely sideways, and we realized, oh boy, this could end up being a long season. with all the questions we have about this team this year, I would much rather you play a team that you should theoretically beat up on, be able to put some backups in the whole 9 yards before going on the road in week number 2 and taking on Kentucky.
Oh, you absolutely, this is the perfect game to play. In theory, on paper, right? You should beat Old Dominion rather easily. You have so many question marks on offense. It's crazy. Here's the interesting part. The only question mark you don't have right now, really, for Sean Lee, Rocket Sanders if healthy.
Right.
Josh Simon.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's it. Everything else is a big question mark.
No, we have a lot of optimism for sellers for the wide receiver room, but we don't know for sure. We got to see it on display.
There is a bunch of transfer portal guys who have been productive in other places that have come into the wide receiver room. You've got, a Nick Harbor who you hope will develop in year 2, but you don't. But you've got question marks all over that. The offensive line, you got a bunch of dudes with potential,
right?
But is that potential going to pop? You got that. Obviously, you have a huge question mark at quarterback. A guy that the little bit you've seen, you're giddy. But he's never started a college football game at all.
Right.
So you have a lot of question marks on offense. And it's good to play Old Dominion. Get everybody feel good about themselves. We say this all the time. When you are successful in a sport, when you walk off the field, the diamond, the court, skate off the rink, off the pitch, and you tear it up and you whoop somebody, you're not going like this. Yeah, but they really sucked. No. You feel good about what you've done.
Exactly.
And you walk off with confidence that you can do that because you just did it. So if you can go on the field against Old Dominion, your defense plays the way you think it will play, and your offense has success, that puts you in the right frame of mind to go to Lexington, Kentucky.
Absolutely.
So, I always love that, man. Yeah, but who you beat was terrible. Okay, so how if we play terrible and don't beat who's terrible? Then what we got going on?
I was going to say, if you get into an overtime game with Old Dominion week number 1, we got a lot of problems to talk about come that reaction Monday.
Exactly. Like my dad was always like that. Like, if one of his favorite teams would beat the crap out of a bad team, he'd go, yeah, but they were a bad team. I go, well, Dad, what if your team lost to that bad team? Then we got a whole other conversation.
I was gonna say there's something to be said about beating teams the exact way that you're supposed to beat them. Like, yes, if the final score of Carolina and Old Dominion is 49-10, it's like, yeah, that's how you're supposed to beat that kind of team.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. You whoop the teams you're supposed to whoop.
My question is, how'd they get that 10?
Yeah, now you're all annoyed. Wait a minute. Hold on here. So, yeah, I mean, you should have an easy time with the Monarchs. Hopefully, offensively, you do things that make you feel good moving forward, because you want to talk about jumping right into the mosh pit in week 2?
Oh, yeah.
You go to Lexington, Kentucky in a game that both teams think they have a really good chance to win.
Right.
And that's where you're at.
Another team, by the way, Kentucky's in the same boat. They play Southern Miss in week number 1. Again, a team that they should probably be able to handle, but they got a lot of questions. They got a new quarterback that they're breaking in. They got a lot of guys in the portal that we don't know how they're going to shake out there. Like, both these teams going to be going into week number 2 still pointing fingers and saying, well, we don't know about this, we don't know about that, in respect to what the other team has.
Think about this for a minute. Both teams, when they square off in Lexington, Kentucky, will have quarterbacks who have one career start.
Exactly. Yep.
And question marks. I mean, South Carolina's got more question marks on offense than Kentucky, but still 2 teams who are trying to figure it out. I mean, Kentucky's got a new offensive coordinator again. So there's stuff there on both sides of the ball for both of those teams going into that week 2 contest. But yeah, you feel good about 4 of your games. It's where do you dig your next 2?
Right.
And if you could win in Lexington, now you got to find one more. And now look, you got to go through a lot of in all of those other games. As we sit here right now on January, listen to me, July 24th, January 24th. On July 24th, the rest of those games, I believe South Carolina will not be favored in the rest of those games.
Probably not.
if the teams that we are looking at right now are anywhere near as good as we think they'll be.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, let's say Missouri's not as good. Now, if they show up at Williams-Brice, let's say Missouri gets back to being the Missouri they've been. That's different. But if Missouri's who they were last year or close to it, they're probably going to be favored coming into the game here at South Carolina.
Sure.
So there's a couple in there that maybe not, but most of those games you're not going to be favored.
Right.
I mean, the A&M game is here. So if A&M isn't what we think they could be, we'll see. Or if South Carolina's better than we think that they could be. But most of these games, you're not going to be favored.
Right.
So you got to find a way to pull. If you can beat Kentucky on the road, you got to pull another one. Then you got your 6.
That's right.
Then you get back to bowl game, and everything's back in the right direction, and everybody can breathe going into year 5.
Mm-hmm.
And then year 5 isn't the hot seat year that people think it could be if they don't go to a bowl game this year. So in those buckets, how many buckets do you have? How many games do you have in the toss-up bucket?
I
know you did this yesterday.
I actually did the chart of this the other day. Let me see. Let me pull this up. Definitely Kentucky in week number 1. Or excuse me, week number 2.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think that's a game that both fan bases look at and say, we should beat that team. I even put LSU in there as well because, again, their defense didn't really improve in the offseason. They're replacing a lot of guys, talented guys on the offense, specifically the Heisman Trophy winner and Jaden Daniels. You know, if you told me I get the brand of LSU makes them scary, but like if you told me South Carolina beat them in week 3, I wouldn't be shocked by it.
Right.
Even Oklahoma as well, because they kind of fall into the same category if we don't really know. Jackson Arnold replacing the offensive line, some questions on defense. A&M, as we just talked about, even Clemson too, because for as much as teams can change in one offseason, Clemson changed the least out of anyone in all of college football. In fact, they lost guys like Bo Collins, one of the better receivers last year, to Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. And obviously they refused to hit the transfer portal, so I don't know how much different this Clemson team is going to be from a year ago. And again, if 2 years ago tells you anything, Carolina's more than capable of going up there and beating what was a better Clemson team than them. So I would even put that in the toss-up category.
But to be fair, Dabo says there's nobody in the transfer portal better than his guys.
Sure, okay.
Nobody in the portal. There were 17 billion players in the portal.
Not
right?
one of them.
Not one of them are better
than
than
wear
his
the paw
guys.
print.
That's right. So, anyway, we shall see. But I think there are enough toss-up type games because there's so many unknowns, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And look, as the season goes along and we learn about these teams, specifically the ones that do have questions, particularly at the quarterback spot, that's going to change. We may go and say, well, Brady Cook's not as good as he was last year. Then the Missouri game maybe becomes toss-up. Clemson could return to their original form and like, okay, well, there's no way you're winning that game at the end of the year, and it becomes, you know, a long shot type thing. Like, it's going to evolve as the season goes along.
That's the fun thing of this because there's so many teams with unknowns. There just are. I mean, like you brought up LSU. We don't know what they're gonna do on offense. Or are they gonna fix their defense? You know, we really don't know about A&M. We don't know about Clemson. We don't know about Oklahoma. There's so many we don't knows right now because either you're starting a new quarterback or maybe you're not as good as you have been previously. The perception, we just don't know.
Right.
So
right.
We shall see. All right, halftime show. Terry Ford, Tyler Head. I'm working on this. Hopefully I'll have it done today. If not, we'll do it tomorrow. Have a little fun. Start 2014, first year of the college football playoff. Because I did this because of Penn State.
Okay.
Because I started off with the idea, how many times has Penn State been in the final 11 in the college football playoff rankings before at the end of the year? How many times? So conceivably, how many times could James Franklin have been in the college football playoff if it was an expanded field? Because James Franklin and Penn State are built for the expanded field. And Big Ten Media Days is going on. So I started there. They said, well, how many SEC teams since the start of the college football playoff would actually be in the 12-team field if there was a 12-team field since 2014? I'm working on it. Maybe we'll get to it soon, but it's fun to talk about. Halftime show, Terry Ford, Tyler Head, rolling till 3 on the game. Halftime show, Terry Ford, Tyler Head. As we roll on until 3 on the game. Starting on Monday, we're going to have a little fun. It's list season. It's talking season. We did one of these a few years ago, our 30 for 30, celebrating South Carolina's 30th year in the SEC. We did you, the fans, voting the top 30 players, Gamecock football players in the SEC era. We counted that down. Had a lot of fun. You voted online at 1075thegame.com a few years ago. We're going to do a little Twitter poll fun. Starting Monday, we're going to have you vote on the best moment in Gamecock sports history since 2000. And we're using football, baseball, men's basketball, women's basketball. We'll have 4 Twitter polls Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week, 4 choices each. The 4 winners will then go into the final Twitter poll the final week, and you will then vote the winner of the best Gamecock sports moment since 2000. So we got that coming up starting next week, sponsored by our buddies at Columbia Craft. All right. So I did this exercise, Tyler, and I started off just looking at the AP Top 25 for fun. Then I got the college football playoff. I just wanted to see the differences also, who moved up after the college football playoff from the final AP poll.
Okay.
Because they are different.
They are.
And when I started with the final AP poll, if you look since 2014 college football playoff, if you would have had a 12-team playoff, because everybody says, oh, the SEC will have tons of teams every year. The SEC conceivably would have had 4 teams in 2018 and 2020 and last year. Close to 4 in 2019 if you look at the final AP poll, but the college football playoff poll had Alabama 13th.
Yep.
It's the only time the Tide would not have made the college football playoff.
Now, if we were retroactively doing this and there was a chance to get in by not being in the top 4, Alabama probably still would have been in.
Alabama would have been in the top 11-ish, which is kind of what you're looking at.
Yes, essentially.
Every year but one since 2014.
Yeah.
Georgia would be, I believe, on a 7-game or 7-year streak of getting in.
Yes.
I do believe.
Because the last year they wouldn't have made it would have been Kirby's first year in 16.
Right. By the way, you know what's interesting? 2014, first year of the college football playoff. You look at the final AP Top 25 poll. Georgia finished 1 spot behind Georgia Tech.
Yeah, and they lost to Georgia Tech in the last game of the regular season, which prevented them from making a New Year's Six Bowl that year.
Think about that for a minute. We look at what Georgia is now.
Yep.
And you go back 9 years, last couple years before Kirby, Georgia Tech actually was ahead of Georgia in the final top 25 poll that year.
Oh, Kirby's first year, they lost to Vanderbilt and Georgia Tech.
Yep.
People forget that.
Forget what? But this is very interesting. In 2014, you know, you had the AP Top 25, which was interesting, had Alabama at number 1. Mississippi State was number 7. They would have made the college football playoff.
They were the first number 1 team in college football playoff poll history.
Think about it.
The DAC attack was real.
The DAC attack with Dan Mullen, they were number 1 for a week.
They were
during that year.
That was a fun week.
And Ole Miss was right on the. If you look at this whole thing, if you go by AP final top 25, before, and I went into the college football playoff as well after I did the AP top 25 for fun. If you look at the ending polls of those years, Alabama is in the final 11 every year.
Yep.
Georgia's in there 7 times. Guess who's third?
Out of the SEC?
Out of the rest of the SEC?
Probably Ole Miss.
Ole Miss.
Yeah.
2 years they finished in the top 11 under Hugh Freeze, and 2 of the last 3 years under Lane. Now, one of those years they'd have been kicked out of the college football playoff because they were on the cusp line and they had got bumped.
Right.
But Ole Miss really is like the 3rd most successful program in the SEC in that regard since 2014. Florida, the final top 25 poll, made it 3 straight years, 17, 18, and 19. Dan Mullen was the head coach.
Yeah. What? Well, that wasn't any of the years they went to the SEC championship game, but they were good. They were the second
sorry,
best
it's 18,
team.
19, 20.
They were the second best team behind Georgia in the East.
18, 19, and 20, they were finished in the top 11 under Dan Mullen.
Yeah.
Now, 1 year, no, they were the worst one was 18 when they were 10th. So they probably would have been safely in all 3 years in the college football playoff.
Sure.
But the point being is, look, a lot of people say Mullen he was done. After he got to the SEC championship game in 20 and they lost to Alabama.
After that guy threw the shoe,
Yes.
that's when they were done.
Yes. The shoe changed the whole program.
That's right.
So they just, and Mullen, remember, there was a lot of talk. Mullen hated recruiting.
Well, he outright said, I don't worry about that in the offseason. Hey, bud, ABC, always be recruiting.
You're recruiting in the SEC, brother.
When you're not sleeping, you're recruiting.
But we forget, Mullen's a really good college football coach. He just hates recruiting.
He's a great coach. He's a great offensive. He was a big part of the reason why Florida won those national championships with Tebow and Chris Leak and stuff, because of his offensive ingenuity. He just didn't like to recruit.
Well, let's face it, Mullen won a lot of Florida with McElwain's players.
Yeah.
And once it was becoming Mullen's players, he was getting bored. He was like, I don't want to do this recruiting thing anymore.
Poor old Sunbelt Billy, the cupboard was pretty bare by the time he got there.
Everybody forgot that, though, conveniently the last 2 years at the cupboard. But I don't think there was doors on the cupboards when Billy showed up.
He took the doors, he took the screws off the doors. He started to ply off the wood paneling a little bit.
So it's Billy didn't get a whole lot from Mullen again. Mullen was in neutral after that the 2020 run. So Florida, LSU has only really had 2 seasons, but one obviously was iconic.
Yep.
In 19. 18, LSU probably would have been knocked out. They were number 11 in the final poll. They were number 11 in the college football playoffs. They barely would have got in 18, and 19, of course, they went crazy.
Yep.
So they'd have made it twice. Then you have Mississippi State, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Auburn, Missouri all have made it once. There's only 4 teams in the SEC that would not have been in this conversation to be in the college football playoffs since 2014, and that would be Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Kentucky, and South Carolina.
Yep.
So we'll get more into this in the next segment. It was very fascinating to go through it, and you go, that's right, Mississippi State.
Yep.
We've gone over this about Mississippi State. It might be the most underrated, solid to pretty good program in the SEC over the last 10, 12 years. Given
where they're located, considering they're not the premier university of the state, the resources they have at their disposal, they shouldn't be as good as they have been in the past couple of decades.
Give them credit.
Yeah.
First of all, they've, for the most part, except last year, hired the right coaches.
Yep.
For the most part. And whoever the coaches are knew how to win there.
Yeah. Well,
to their credit.
And they're classically one of those teams that, if we were starting the SEC over, they would not be desirable in the slightest.
If we started this world over, they'd probably be a group of 5 school.
Oh, 1,000%. Starkville, Mississippi, not exactly a bustling metropolis.
Not a media haven, not a big population kind of deal.
Again, at least
not a big brand.
At least Ole Miss is the state school.
Yep, not getting TV university ratings. Yeah, Mississippi State wouldn't be in the SEC if you started over.
No, not at all.
And look what they've done. To their credit.
It's impressive.
To their credit. So, yeah, I'd forgot. It hit me. Oh, yeah, that's right. Dak, number 1 in the country at some point that year. Dan Mullen. We'll come back and look at some more of this. Just having a little fun with if the college football playoff was expanded starting with the first year of the college football playoff in 2014, how this whole thing would play itself out and how the SEC would factor in. We're having a little fun with it. Terry Ford, Tyler Head, halftime show. We'll continue on this little riff next here on The Game. The Nest, 1331 Gadsden Street in the Vista. They are the people to go to if you want to redo some stuff in your house, whether it's the lighting fixtures, whether it's, like I said, lighting or fixtures. Maybe you want to put a new tub in. Maybe you want new appliances. Maybe you want to deal with some plumbing. Whatever you want to look at to revamp the home. over 7 years of experience at the Nest. I did, like yesterday, we went to the nestshowroom.com, and you get to see how fantastic the showroom is. So many choices, so many varieties. I don't care what your budget is. Do not care. The Nest will be able to set you up with what you want in your home. 803-978-2025. Just call them. Set up an appointment. Go in. Speak to one of the experts. They will match your vision with your budget. It's the Nest, 1331 Gadsden. Again, 803-978-2025. Give those folks a ring. Go in and watch them do their magic. It's the Nest, again, on Gadsden in the Vista. Well, we're talking about just having a little fun today, looking at the college football playoff that will be expanding this year. And what would have been like if it would have been 12 teams the whole time, starting in 2014? And just looking at how the SEC would fare in this. Mm-hmm. And the one year, though, that's really ugly is 2016.
Ooh, now, not a great year.
Yeah. Now, Alabama, in 2015, Bama would have been the only team to make the college football playoff. Well, I'll take it back. Maybe I got to go back and look at 15 because Ole Miss was 10th in the final.
And Ole Miss did beat Alabama that year, second year in a row. That's what the funny thing, we like to pound our chest for the strength of the SEC and the long streak of either winning or playing for the national championship. There were a lot of years that Alabama was carrying the water for the rest of the conference. If we didn't have them, then the SEC wouldn't have been a whole lot.
Yeah, it would have been back-to-back years. Bama would have been the only team
right in
the 12 because Reddy Alabama in 15 was 12-1, number 2 seed in the college football playoff final rankings. Clemson was 1. The next SEC team was Ole Miss at 12, which means you get bumped because you're going to get 11 in the Group of 5 team. Well, some of the Group of 5s are pretty interesting. We'll get to that. Navy would have been in the college football playoff one year.
That's right. They almost made a New Year's Six that year. They had Keenan Reynolds.
Yep. And that year, your Group of 5 team, where's it at? As I sit here and spin through it real quick, Stanford would have been in the college football playoff.
You mean ACC powerhouse Stanford?
Yes. That ACC tradition of Stanford. I guess Houston. Number 18 in the college football playoff rankings. Houston would have been the Group of 5 team in the college football playoff in 2015.
Their fan would have been losing his mind.
Well, there's 2 to be fair. One's wearing a Texas shirt. So 2015 would have been only Alabama. Ole Miss would have been just on the outside looking. And 16 was only Alabama. And that year, though, Auburn was the second highest SEC team at 14.
Yep, they made the Sugar Bowl that year.
And that year was the year Florida at 9-4 had the tiebreaker in conference over Tennessee.
Right.
Because Florida was 6-2, Tennessee 4-4, if my memory's serving me. And so Florida was the victim. What was it, like 100-15 or 54-16 or whatever?
54-16. That was, again,
Alabama, Florida.
See, and that was the year that Tennessee started off that 5-game winning streak, and they completely fell off and ended up in the Music City Bowl. That was Kirby's first year at Georgia. Vanderbilt was.
It was a weird
Vanderbilt.
year, man.
You know, Kentucky didn't do a whole lot that year. Like, it was just a bad year for the East.
So 15-16 was kind of a time for the SEC. After 14, you would have got 3 teams in.
Right.
With, by the way, the 3 teams, Alabama, Mississippi State, and Ole Miss. How interesting is that in 14?
Right.
In 17, you get 3 more teams. The only time Auburn shows up, they were number 7. Georgia was number 2. Alabama was number 1.
Remember, Auburn would have been the first team to ever make it as a 2-loss in the 4-team playoff had they beaten Georgia in the because they were number 4 going into that game.
Right. Didn't happen.
No.
And then in 18, it was Alabama, LSU, Florida, Georgia. Now, things are starting to peak back up again. You got 4. In 19, we talked about LSU, Georgia, Florida were in. That's the only time Alabama would miss. They were 13th in the final college football playoff in 19. 20, of course, Bama bounces back. They're undefeated in the SEC. It would have been Florida, who lost the SEC championship game, Georgia, and Texas A&M's only appearance. Remember, that was that.
Yep.
That was Jimbo's really true only good year
because
at
they
A&M.
were 5th in the final poll.
Yes. 2021, you got Georgia and Bama 1 and 2, and Ole Miss at number 8.
Yep.
2022, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, who was number 6 in the final poll. Their only appearance in this. And then 2023, Georgia, Alabama, Missouri, Ole Miss, all were in, and then LSU was number 12. So you were really close to having 5 teams in the college football playoff if it was 12-team expanded. So, yeah, that's the way this thing rolls out.
And that's why, you know, we talked about the media poll last week. I gave my prediction on how I think it was going to shake out. I'm really hesitant to go past 4 teams. Like, I feel pretty confident saying, yeah, Georgia, Texas, Alabama, probably going to be in. I slide in Ole Miss as well, but I really, even Missouri might have a great season. I have a tough time saying it's going to be 5 teams with the SEC.
I think 4 is your ceiling. I think you're just asking way too much to go past 4.
Right.
I do. I mean, I hear the history tells you they've never been past 4. They got close last year with 5. LSU just missed. But I just think more than 4 is asking a lot.
And my interest now, and I've always held the belief, especially in that final poll, once you get past 4, who cares, right? Like, it doesn't matter. Outside of the Group of 5 team who got to play in a New Year's Six bowl, I don't think the playoff committee put as much meticulous thought into 5 through 25. Or, okay, 5, sure, because you're right on the line, but like 7 through 25 most years, like, all right, we're just going to throw them there. They lost, we'll move them down. They won, we'll move them up. But it didn't really matter. Now, 1 through 11 matters, as well as whatever your Group 5 is going to be. I'm interested to see if that changes the way they look at those teams ranked there now that it does matter where they put them.
Okay, real quick, let's go with the premise 4 make it in the SEC.
Okay.
feels like, okay, obviously you're going to have Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Feels like Alabama.
Until they show me otherwise.
Until they show you. A lot of people love Texas because they're in the college football playoff last year. And Ole Miss?
Yes. They can't not make it, in my opinion. They're so loaded.
And what they've done on defense through the portal, no one's talking about how much they've brought in these pieces to improve their defense. Our boy Prince.
Right.
Princely from Florida coming off the edge.
Walter Nolan from Texas A&M.
Walter Nolan, who if he ever plays to his ability, he's a scary man.
Right.
So I believe I do. Again, you know me. I'm not as big on Texas as others, but I feel like Georgia, Alabama, to prove us otherwise. I'm with you totally there, and Ole Miss. Now, if I'm going to throw Texas out, let me just for the exercise.
Sure.
If I'm throwing Texas out, who am I putting in to replace Texas? Is a great question. It's either Tennessee or A&M.
Mm-hmm.
One of those two. I think they're right below. They're on that. They're not on level 1.
Sure.
They're on level 2.
Well, and I think it's also important to remember as well that with the Big Ten expanding to 18 teams, and we talk about the SEC having a lot of tiebreakers. Big Ten could be even worse.
Yeah.
You could have several teams that don't play each other tied with the exact same record. So it's like, okay, well, how many schools does the Big Ten get in? Because if they get in 5, the SEC, and then you have to have all of your qualified conference champions, there may not be a lot of room to add in more teams from the SEC. You know what I mean? You just might run out of space.
Right. I might throw Missouri in the mix of maybe. I mean, maybe it's because Eli is Eli. I'm not giving enough love, but they're in that mix too to be the 4th.
And look, they have a very manageable schedule. We talked about they could be 8-1 when they come in here in November. And again, that loss may be to Georgia, and they may end up 10-2, 11-1 in the regular season. But again, it really just depends on what everybody's doing around you.
Yeah, I mean, Missouri's got a favorable schedule. Tennessee's schedule's pretty favorable. So's A&M's.
Yeah.
So I'm not buying into Texas like others. I feel like one of those 3 could be the 4th team. But Alabama, till they prove us otherwise, Georgia and Ole Miss to me are the 3 that definitely would get it. And if I got to pick out of that mosh pit, I think A&M has got more talent on paper, like in their starting 22 than Tennessee. Wegman's coming back, so he started. Nico has started 1 game, a bowl game. That's a tough call, man. I might take A&M more than Missouri. I think A&M on paper has got more talent than Tennessee or Missouri in their 22.
Well, as we talked about yesterday, it's not a total tear-down rebuild.
No.
Like, you've got a lot there. You just got to have the right guy to get the most out of what you got.
Yeah. Well, when we come back, I'll give you a little group of 5 out of this. 2 teams would make multiple appearances in the college football playoff from the group of 5.
Okay.
Stew that through your head. Only one coach would coach a team in the college football playoff from the group of 5 and from the Power League. Run that one through your head. Elijah and I figured this one out, just shooting the crap about this. So I believe we're correct. We haven't had our deep dive research department double check it, but we think we're correct on it. So we'll do that. Also, our Firehouse Subtext, the hour 803-404-6100 halftime show. Terry Ford, Tyler Head, till 3, hanging here on the game. All right, we'll have a little fun on the halftime show. Just kind of going through the what if, because it's talking season. What if the college football playoff was expanded to 12 teams since 2014? How would that play out? We've kind of gone over it with the SEC, and we're going to get our Firehouse Subtext the hour here in a second, 803-446-6100. Okay. 2 programs in the group of 5 have made multiple appearances, would make multiple appearances in this scenario.
Yep.
Want to give it a shot?
Oh, man. And are they the same teams that got to play in New Year's Six Bowls during that time?
I believe yes.
Okay.
One played in the college football playoff.
Okay. Is Luke Fickell the coach?
He got Cincinnati. He would have Cincinnati in twice.
Okay, Cincinnati
and once
twice.
for real, for real.
Once for real, for real.
But Fickell's not the coach.
Fickell's not the coach.
There's one other team that's made it twice.
Okay, one other team that made it twice.
In this scenario. And didn't make it at all. In the Final Four, obviously. There's only one group of 5 teams ever played in the 4 playoff.
Oh, man. It wasn't UCF, was it?
Yep.
It was UCF? Okay.
Remember, they went undefeated back-to-back
They're
years.
the national champion.
They are the national champion of 2017, I believe.
That's correct.
Okay, so what coach has coached a group, in this scenario, would coach a group of 5 team into the college football playoff and a team from the power leagues?
Definitely wasn't Scott Frost.
Nope. You're so close at Nebraska.
Yeah.
Who replaced Scott Frost?
Matt Rule.
Nope, not at Central Florida.
Oh, sorry, not Central Florida. Gus Malzahn.
Not at Central Florida. Some guy in between Malzahn and Frost. Was only there for a few years and then peaced out. It was a very underwhelming hire at a Power 5 league, but he has been much better than anybody wants to admit they thought. His last name rhymes with Skyple.
Oh, man, Josh Heupel. Wow. How did I forget about his time at Central
Josh
Florida?
Heupel, 2018, was the coach of the second undefeated. Remember, they lost their bowl game, but they were undefeated in the regular season.
Right.
They would have been the college football playoff. Tennessee, 2022, would have made the college football playoff.
Wow, how about that?
You think about it for a minute. And look, I was not, when Tennessee hired Josh Heupel, I was like most people, huh?
Yeah.
Come on. Tennessee, you want to be all Tennessee again and everything, and this is the guy that's going to take you back to greatness? This guy, whose kind of one-loss record was starting to go backwards at Central Florida once he was not using Scott Frost players anymore? This is your guy you think is going to... Josh Heupel's been much better than I ever thought he was going to be at Tennessee. I'll be honest.
1,000%.
And they would have been in the college football playoff 2 years ago.
That's right.
So he'd be the guy, group of 5 at Central Florida, Power Conference at Tennessee. Only one. Navy would have made it 1 year. Western Michigan with P.J. Fleck rowing the boat.
That's right. Tulane would have been.
Tulane a couple years ago when they were undefeated. Yeah, so it's a little interesting kind of deal with the power conferences.
Which that is going to be the interesting thing about this 12-team format. Not that I expect any group of 5 teams to make any serious dent, but like what the representation looks like. Like, yeah, like Boise State, maybe the team that goes next year, but like within 5 to 6 years, how many different group of 5 teams make their way into the college football playoff?
Boise State was the first one in 2014 in the college football playoff final to get in. They were 20th in the country, I think. They'd have been the first. But yeah, it's just interesting looking through the whole thing. So anyway, what do you got there? Firehouse Sub, text to the hour, 803-446-6100.
Nameless texter, Clemson beat South Carolina without scoring an offensive touchdown. You put them in the toss-up category. Justify that. You start the transfer portal. Clemson beat South Carolina without any offense whatsoever, but remains a toss-up against a team that didn't make a bowl game. I go back to South Carolina addressed their needs in the portal to get better this offseason. What did Clemson do to get better? Nothing. Clemson was also way worse last year than anybody thought they were going to be. Who say they're not going to be worse this year? And they might be better. They might be a playoff team by the time that game rolls around, and I'll change my opinion. But as of right now, it's toss-up.
I'm guessing, was that text from D. Sweeney?
Tyler from Spartanburg.
Look, again, and I get it. Typically, look, I understand. Look, probably a Clemson fan. How do you say that? Well, it's easy. You just went over the whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean, look, South Carolina doesn't brain cramp at the beginning of that game, let the ball lay on the turf. Who knows where this thing goes?
Right.
I mean, it was a very close game that, again, South Carolina's offensive line was a mess. It was just, and that was a close football game. So to flip it, I mean, a Clemson fan perspective, you just heard, hey, good enough, didn't score an offensive touchdown and beat them. They didn't go to a bowl game. Clemson did. Yeah, but I think you hit the point. South Carolina went out in the offseason and tried to address all their weaknesses. Clemson's bringing back the same dudes thinking it's going to get better because, well, they wear Clemson gear.
Exactly.
So we'll see. And like you said, 2 years ago, who went up and stopped the long winning streak upstate?
That's right.
So we're just saying right now that's how it feels. We'll see where it is as the season goes along. We said Clemson's schedule is very friendly.
Yeah.
If they could be better on offense this year, they might be a two-loss team at the end of the year when South Carolina rolls upstate.
Right.
But we'll see because we don't know. We're seeing a head coach who doesn't want to evolve doing anything. He brought in a fancy offensive coordinator, and from everything we hear, you got to run the Clemson offense.
I was going to say, you didn't allow him to do what you thought he was going to do.
Yeah, your offense is great when you have an NFL quarterback triggering it.
Sure.
When you don't have an NFL quarterback triggering it.
See, I don't think Kate Klubnik's high on too many people's draft boards.
I haven't heard a lot about Klubnik in the first round or in the Heisman conversation.
Me either.
Just saying. So we appreciate the text. We can always agree to disagree, have fun, whatever. It's all good. And we'll do another one again next hour as well. 803-404-6100. Our Firehouse subtext the hour. Coming up, it's football in the 1 o'clock hour, sponsored by Atlantic Windows and Doors. Chris Lowe from ESPN was on the postgame show with Jay and Elijah, talked about a bunch of stuff in college football. If you missed the whole interview, we're going to take some cuts from Chris, starting off the 1 o'clock hour, talking about South Carolina and the SEC and college football. That's coming up next on the halftime show with Terry Ford and Tyler Head as we roll this sucker up until 3. Then Jay and Elijah will take over with the postgame show right here on the Game in Columbia, Florence, and Myrtle Beach.
The game. Hello.
Halftime show, Terry Ford, Tyler Head. Football in the 1 o'clock hour, sponsored by Atlantic Windows and Doors. Yeah, get our Chris Lowe ready here, Tyler. We're going to fire up some Chris Lowe from ESPN. Talking with Jay and Elijah on the postgame show yesterday. A variety of stuff. A lot of SEC, really, pretty much all this is SEC stuff from Chris Lowe. Let's start with, let's go with the cut 6, Tyler. Chris Lowe, his thoughts on the belief in Shane Beamer at South Carolina.
I've known Shane Beamer a long time, 2 decades or more. And I never doubted that he was ready for the job. When he got it, a lot of people said, well, he's never been a coordinator, he's not done this, not done that. I think what he did his first 2 years was underrated, and the coaching job he did. Now, last year was what it was. I think this year it will be very telling if they can get back to being a winning football team, a team that's in the postseason, with the way he's been able to, I know they have it, you're not going to just out-recruit Georgia, okay? You're not going to do that. You're not going to out-recruit Alabama and LSU. But bring in guys who are really good football players and develop them. And I think they got a couple guys up front on defense, Sanders and Hemingway. Those guys could play for a lot of schools. You got to be able to get more of those and bring in guys that maybe weren't as highly rated and get them to that point. And I like Shane's staff. He hasn't been afraid to make changes the last couple of years, and certainly he's done that this year. But this is a big year for him, and he knows that. There's no question he doesn't walk into this season with his eyes closed, but I think he also feels good about the culture, the bond on this football team, and some of the young guys like the Sellers who haven't had really chances to play, but they know what they've seen behind closed doors and what they feel like they can do this season.
We talked about Monday. Yeah, what's today? Wednesday. Okay, Monday. It's all running together. We talked about like some of the national guys I talked to at SEC Media Days, and they were saying, "Oh, who's going to be the head coach in 2025?" Mm-hmm. I said, "Shane Beamer." I unless this team is like Vanderbilt bad, Shane Beamer will be back. He might be on a hot seat in 2025 with another 5-7, but I think he would be back for 2025. But we look back at last year really quick. And I was discussing this with someone today. They were asking about, Shane Beamer at SEC Media Days and what'd you think of the vibe of the guys that were there and all this other stuff. And we were talking about last year, and I said, if we're going to try to be objective for a minute, your offensive line is a disaster, right?
Right.
And if your offensive line isn't any good, it's really tough to run the ball and throw the ball.
Usually.
Plus, you had one wide receiver that stayed healthy pretty much the whole year, and even he was not 100% in the Texas A&M game in Xavier Legette.
Yep.
Your running back room consisted of a former quarterback wide receiver, a Division II running back, a specialist situational running back, and a freshman running back you really had no plan to play.
Not great.
So when you look at all that, 5-7, you might go like this. Well, 5-7, probably the best you can do with that, right?
Sure.
And so, like last year, we can sit here and say, okay, why didn't maybe Shane sit Clayton White down sooner to change the defense? Why did Shane, wait, I don't know, as long as he did to put Mario Anderson in full time? I mean, we can sit there and nitpick at decisions, right? Maybe. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, if you look at it, I mean, they pretty much won the games they should have won, except Florida, and lost the games they should have lost, especially with the way this team, with the offensive line and the injuries at receiver and the running back room, and then your defense didn't play well till November. So think about it, your defense wasn't good in September or October.
Right.
Let's go with all that real, and then you go, okay, you were one stop away from going 6-6 and playing in a bowl game.
Yeah, when you lay it all out like that, not that 5-6 or 5-7 is acceptable, but it makes a little bit more sense. And that's the thing, right? Where Carolina is not a national powerhouse. They're not the team that was winning 10, 11 games every single year like Spurrier had them a decade ago. People aren't paying as close of attention to South Carolina. So when they form opinions of this program, it's from more of a 10,000-foot view, kind of a drive-by casual. Oh, they went 5-7. Well, took a big step back, didn't they? Well, they should probably fire Beamer then, right? Like, it's those kind of things. We're not really paying attention to all the details of what led to those factors, which, again, that's not an excuse, and Beamer has not gone out there and said, well, if we didn't get injured at offensive line and this and that, it's implied, but that's not what he's hanging his hat on, saying, well, that's the reason why we didn't win more of the games than that. But, when you kind of dig into it a little bit more, it makes sense, why they had the season they had.
And every one of these games, pretty much, there were the moments where you could have changed momentum, kept yourself in a game. I don't know, maybe put yourself in a better position to possibly steal one. You just couldn't make plays.
Right.
And that comes to you need more players. Or the players you have might have a high ceiling. They're just not ready.
Right.
They're not developed. So, I mean, at the end of the day, the 5-7, personally, me, and look, everybody's got their own opinion. I can't sit here and go, man, those guys, what a terrible coaching job. No, I think the coaching job, for the most part, to navigate this to 5-7 with all the mess that went on, I think that's pretty good. If you ask me what's the one thing I would question was the roster makeup. That was the running back position. That's the crew you decided to run with in 2023.
Yes. Now, it wasn't from a lack of effort.
You tried, you just couldn't get people.
Going after Diggs in the portal, and he ended up going to LSU. So they tried. They just couldn't land anyone.
They weren't successful in getting a running back.
Could also have been a reason why Montero Hardesty got let go after the season, because, like, hey, we went in with a subpar running back room and struggled.
Oh, I think that is part of the other parts why you have a new running back coach. The second part of it was you went into last season knowing your offense, a lot of it was predicated on keeping Spencer Rattler alive.
Right.
And your offensive line was not deep. You did not have depth at offensive line. The minute you had a couple of injuries, you went sideways.
Yeah.
And you were playing freshmen who you didn't want to play. So if you want to go back and look at last year and try and say, well, okay, and criticize, I think more of the criticism would be the roster you came into the year with than the coaching job. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I'm sure, again, hindsight's everything, man. It'd be great to jump in that, phone booth with George Carlin and Bill and Ted and go backwards and go, okay, now we know what we know. Let's go get a running back and let's get some offensive linemen. Let's do this thing.
Doesn't work that way.
But it doesn't work that way. So I think the coaching job to navigate the 5-7, again, we can say, okay, you should have changed the defense up sooner, legit, or you should have played Mario Anderson sooner with more carries, legit. But again, when your offensive line is as bad as it was, I mean, even once Anderson started carrying the ball as the full-time back, Tyler, he had 2 games where he went over 100 yards and 1 game over 90 yards.
Well, and I believe in both those games, he busted off those big runs that ate up a chunk of those yards.
And 1 game was against Vandy, 102 yards. The loss to Tennessee was the big run.
Yep.
We had the touchdown run in that 41-20 loss. And then the 98-yard game was against Florida, where South Carolina moved the ball all over the place against the Gators. They just couldn't get the defensive stop at the end.
Right.
But it wasn't like as soon as you plugged Anderson in, oh, my God, the run game just became fun. No, the offensive line was an issue.
No, I mean, how many times did we see somebody, and, it ended up being Anderson more than it was Karen Joyner's season one long, but take the handoff, run right into the back of the offensive line, and do good to get back to the line of scrimmage.
Right. You had nowhere to go. Like the butt of the offensive lineman made the tackle.
Right.
Because the offensive lineman had no push. Well, the last 2 games of the year against over above average and good defenses. Kentucky above average defense to good if you want to go that far, and Clemson a good defense. Anderson gained 27 yards and 35 yards. Both those games were close.
Right.
You couldn't run the ball. You flat out could not run the ball against those 2 defensive fronts. So, yeah, you can say, okay, you should have used Anderson sooner as the number 1. Okay, but still, I don't think that solves your issue on offense.
No.
And defensively, yes. Maybe, if you're Shane Beamer, you come up a little sooner and say, hey, we gotta do something different, Clayton, because this is not – we can't cover slot receivers, and we're not getting enough pass rush.
Yeah.
And we're not consistent against the run. We got to do something. Maybe you have that conversation sooner. But for the most part, again, the coaching job to get to 5-7 with all these issues, I don't think that's a place you start pointing a finger. But if you want to talk about the roster coming into the year, 2 key positions where you're like, I mean that's a legitimate conversation. But I just don't. I haven't changed my mind. The culture of this team is still good. You didn't see a bunch of people run away in the portal like, oh, my God, I got to get away from this place. This is awful and terrible. Juice Wells left, but Juice Wells was going to leave before the season ended last year.
Sure.
That's what it felt like. But they kept a lot of guys. A lot of guys stayed.
Yeah. Well, and mentioning the culture aspect of this and doing the job that we do, knowing people that have insight into what goes on in the locker room and within this team, there were culture problems. Would have heard about some things probably towards the end of last year when things weren't going well. And to this point, we've heard nothing. Everything seems to still be buttoned up. And again, nobody's happy with how the last season ended, but everybody seems to be on the same page and pointed in the right direction to go into this year.
Yeah, like you lost Pup Howard, but Pup Howard wanted to go back home.
Yeah, I get that.
Plus, he saw all the additions coming in at linebacker or the whispers of what they were going to do, and he was like, okay, I want to go.
Well, and
go play in Florida.
Florida was screaming from their deserted island, please, somebody, come. We need help on defense.
Help us. Come home, Pup. Come home. So the culture is still good. And, again, the recruiting right now, again, 2025, everybody's losing their mind over recruiting. We'll see where it ends up. But, you had an excellent class coming in 2024, really good class in 2023. I still think the momentum is going in the right direction. Yeah, did you hit a speed bump? Yes, you did. But at the end of the day, I just don't get the hot seat 2024 for Shane Beamer. I don't get it. I don't agree with that from just kind of what you see and what you hear and just kind of looking at this. I just don't think that's the case.
No.
I just don't. So Chris Lowe, we just heard Chris Lowe's belief in Shane Beamer. We will come back, hear Chris Lowe's thoughts on the perception of the Gamecock program and where it's at. So we'll talk about that next. All right. Ultimate Season Ticket is happening. We will get started July 29th. Your chance to vote. Listen to me. Your chance to register. It's real easy. You're just going to go click on 1075thegame.com, click on the little flippy thingy that says Ultimate Gamecock Season Ticket. And once you do that, then you just fill out the little form, hit submit, and you're in. We will do the drawing of the final three the Monday of our Summer Golf Classic. Then the day of the Classic, which is August 23rd, I believe. I'm going off the top of my head.
Believe so.
That you will have the final three be at the golf tournament, and then we'll pick the winner there for the Ultimate Season Ticket, which is home season tickets for all Gamecock football games, men's basketball, women's basketball, and baseball. Did it last year. Going to do it again this year. Once again, our buddies at the Men's Clinic of South Carolina will be sponsoring it. The Ultimate Season Ticket 2.0 right here on the game. We'll come on back. Here's some more Chris Lowe. The perception of the South Carolina Gamecock football program. We'll hear what Chris Lowe from ESPN has to say about that next. Terry Ford, Tyler Head, halftime show till 3 on the game. Halftime show, football on the 1 o'clock hour, sponsored by Atlantic Windows and Doors. Well, breaking news. We'll get back to Chris Lowe, but breaking news in the college football world. Guess who's coming back to College Game Day?
B1 Pat McAfee.
Yes, he is. It's announced on a video post just a little while ago. McAfee will be back on game day. And it's interesting that, he came out near the end of the year and talked about all the harsh, intense criticism he got from college football fans. And he said, I'm paraphrasing it. He was like, look, usually when I do a show, I jump on something and I'm new. I'll get all the criticism and hate in the beginning, but after a bit of time, everybody kind of settles in and goes, okay, I get it. Okay, sure. And he's like, a lot of it tones down. Mm-hmm. It's like, you never have everybody love you, but a lot of that harsh criticism, once they kind of get the gist of the show, they kind of chill.
Right.
He said it wasn't like that with the college football thing. And first of all, I'll ask you, were you down with McAfee?
I like McAfee. I'm fine with him. I've followed his content for years, back when he was doing stuff at Barstool and before his show ever got to ESPN. So I'm very familiar with who he is. And, sometimes he can be a little much. I don't sit there and listen to him for 3 hours on end all the time necessarily. But he's definitely a little bit of an acquired taste. And, for a show like Game Day, which has such a passionate following from college football fans, when you bring in something that's different, there's a lot of people, especially older school fans, that aren't going to be as receptive to it. And I saw that criticism as the year went along, and it did not waver because he's a different kind of cat. He's unlike anybody else that's on that show.
Mm-hmm. And I got no problem with McAfee. Sometimes I think he's actually really funny.
Yeah.
I love the little segment with people trying to, kick field goals.
Phenomenal.
And I think there's other things he does where he brings some flavor to the show. Mm-hmm. So I didn't hate him. I wasn't like, oh my God, this guy's awful. And I'm like you. Occasionally, the ESPN show will be on when I got the TV in the office, and I'll take a few minutes to watch it, and sometimes I'm entertained.
Sure.
I'm just wondering, and I think you hit part of it, was the old school fan who just doesn't like change to begin with, and this dude is so different. And then, of course, you have a void, because, let's face it, Lee Corso, it's the time is winding down for Lee to be on TV. And he's the original. And the thing with Lee Corso, look, nobody goes to College Game Day to get intense X's and O's.
No.
They try to give you some of that, but it's entertainment. It's a pregame show.
Right.
But Lee Corso could joke around and be a goober, but then turn around and talk football because he was a football coach.
Right.
I guess if I'm sitting here thinking about why people don't like McAfee, besides it's different and all that stuff, you think of him, you don't think he's a college football guy. He played in the NFL. Yeah, he played at West Virginia, punted. But he kind of came out in the media as more, when he first started, as an NFL guy than a college football guy.
Sure.
I think there's some people who watch that show go, they're forcing and they're shoehorning this guy into College Game Day to replace Corso because they think he's a funny, wow personality.
And there's an element of that, too. Like you said, he did kind of rise in his media career as being an NFL guy. He's not afraid to admit about things he doesn't know about. Mm-hmm. So they'll be on the game day desk, and they'll be talking about this with that school or that with that school. He'll say, I didn't know that. And it's those little kind of things that you think aren't really that big of a deal, but people will say that, and he doesn't understand college football. He doesn't understand this, understand that. And he, in a way, opens himself up for that criticism by admitting that he doesn't know. And again, it's not detrimental necessarily, but it's those little things that people kind of pry into, saying, well, this guy's not a real college football guy like Herbstreit, like Howard, like these guys that have been on the desk for a long time. And also, I think there's an element of people, and look, we all love Lee Corso, like you said. Glad that he still gets to do his headgear. That's about the only thing that he can do now because his health's not in a good place and he can't riff on things. He has to script out whatever he ends up saying on the desk. I feel like there's a lot of people that think he's trying to upstage what Corso is, because Corso is the entertainment of the show, not just the headgear thing, some of the things that he would say and the banter they would have back and forth when he was of good health to do that. And McAfee comes in just 1,000 miles an hour, and it feels like he's almost kind of, in a way, trying to push Corso out. In a way, which isn't true.
It's
but
not
I
true,
can see how
but you're
people
right.
would feel that way.
Right. If you love Corso, you're getting that feel. Oh, this guy's just trying to be the next Corso or be like Corso. And the other part of it, I think, because he's so different, McAfee, and they've put him on for 3 hours on this show. Maybe they should have kind of slow rolled McAfee in.
Well,
you know what I mean? Like maybe he's dispersed through the show and he's just not on the on the platform for 3 hours.
And
maybe
when,
that would have been a way.
when he was not a permanent feature on the show a couple years ago, he'd pop in for a show or two here and there. That's kind of what they did with him. Like, all right, he's here this segment, and then a little while later, like, he's out there with people tailgating, or he's out there jumping into a river. Like, they moved him around a lot, kept it fresh. But, like, yes, when he's on the desk for 3 hours, and again, his go-to is not going to be the X's and O's approach of things. It's going to be something, witty or something, half joking or whatever it is. That can get a little tiresome at times.
I just think I like him, and I
he
think
plays
there's
the
a
crowd on everything.
Yes, and I think there's a place for him on the show. And I mean, and a permanent. I mean, if you want to have him as one of the permanent guys, but that's what you got to do. You got to say, okay, we got to play to his strengths.
Yes.
And we got to take his strengths and, okay, how do we use them? How do we maximize them? And are there ways we shouldn't use him because we're putting either him in a bad light or putting the show in a bad light? I think there's a way for him to be there. I do, because I think he can be funny. He can be interesting. I just don't know if 3 hours of sitting there talking pregame, with the guys is the way to go. I don't know.
And there's always the element that he, when he's on the desk, does tend to upstage the other guys there. And again, you got Herb Street, Howard, Reese Davis, these guys that have been around for a long time. It's like, well, who's this new guy coming in making all about him? And again, I don't have a problem with him, but I can see where people's issue comes from.
Yeah, it's just, and the show, I get why you want to juice it up some, because Herb Street is Herb Street.
Yeah.
That's who he is. I'll be honest with you, I've never been a big Desmond Howard guy.
Right.
And I've heard some interesting stories behind the scenes about Desmond Howard that I can't share.
Okay.
And they need something. I get it, especially with Lee Corso not being able to be what he used to be. And I think there's something there for McAfee. And look, maybe in year two, because year one is always can be clunky.
Yeah.
Maybe year two will be a little bit more smoother. Maybe McAfee will be a little bit more well-rounded, where the hardcore people aren't flipping out anymore, and maybe, he could be able to get that thing in the right seat, in the right lane, and then all of a sudden, this isn't a conversation anymore.
Right.
I don't know. But it is interesting, Pat McAfee coming back to College Game Day. All right, here is Chris Lowe talking about on the postgame show with Jay and Elijah, the perception of South Carolina right now in the SEC.
Yeah, I think you just hit it, flying under the radar. You didn't hear much talk about the Gamecocks, really across all formats, as I did radio and TV, and just not a lot of people talking about it. And I think when you have a losing season, when you lose a player like a Spencer Rattler, who was really good. I don't think Spencer got near the credit he deserved last year by the way he played for South Carolina. There are going to be a lot of questions. A lot of people sort of discount them. I thought they would be about where they were, 12, 13. And you know what? I think that's good for Shane. I think it's good for the team that people have sort of written them off. I think they'll play better. I think they'll be a lot more motivated, a lot more focused to go in and prove people wrong, much like they did his first 2 years. I mean, he wins 7 games his first year. They play 4 quarterbacks. One of those is a GA coach. The other guy is a Division II player. Their second year, they get better. They beat Tennessee. They beat Clemson in the season. And I think last year was a bit of a bummer. It was a downer for everybody, Shane included. So here's a chance to sort of get back and be that team that goes to the postseason. I never want to sort of single out 1 or 2 games that I think will make or break a season. But you look at those first 4 games for the Gamecocks, they got to figure out a way to be 3-1 in those first 4 games. And one of those games is at Kentucky, the second one. Then they come back home and play LSU at home. 2 of those are non-conference games they certainly should win. So being 3-1 to me is an absolute must for South Carolina as they go through the rest of the schedule. They didn't get an easy draw either. I don't think they've got the hardest schedule, but they certainly didn't get an easier one. And, how Lenore Sellers plays and how he develops from that first game on. And Shane told me that he feels much better about his depth and being able to roll in guys there in the defensive line right there in the interior than he did last year. But so, stopping the run is going to be critical. And I think, do they get a healthy Rocket Sanders? If they do, and they can open some holes for him, he's another one that people have forgotten about because he was hurt. But 2 years ago, catching the football, earning tough yards, being able to break plays and those chunk yardage run plays, he was as good as anybody in the league. So if they get a healthy version of him, that makes a big difference for the Gamecocks.
Yeah, a lot of it. look, we've talked about this. A lot of it's come down to getting an offensive line that can be solid and Lennar Sellers being the wild card of how he grows and improves during the season.
Right.
But yeah, they are under the radar. Once the day was done on Monday, there wasn't a lot of conversation about South Carolina SEC Media Days. That's okay.
Came in, handled their business, didn't say anything controversial, and got out of there.
Yep.
Which I think they're totally fine with.
All right. Well, we haven't seen a lot of social media stuff coming out from South Carolina like we did the last couple of years either. They're like, okay, all right, everybody, let's get our focus right back into here to get us back where we need to be. All right, halftime show, football in the 1 o'clock hour, sponsored by Atlantic Windows and Doors. More Chris Lowe on the post-game show from yesterday coming up next on the game.
Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Terry Ford along with you on your Wednesday here on the game. Kind of going through Chris Lowe's conversation that he had with Jay and Elijah yesterday on the postgame show. Chris Lowe from ESPN covers college football on a national standpoint. Was the one that actually broke the Nick Saban retirement all the way back in January. That's got to be on his trophy case, I would think.
Yeah,
It's an all-timer right
that
there.
one, right? Oh, sure.
But obviously has a keen eye on the SEC, so I think he gives a really good perspective. We'll play this clip here in a minute of the dynamic landscape of quarterbacks in the SEC coming into this year.
I mean, you take a step back and think about the quarterback position in the league.
Right.
Yeah, you got Carson back at Georgia. Yeah, you got Jalen Milroe back at Alabama. But, I mean, look, Jalen Milroe, once they figured out what to do with him last year.
Yeah, I mean, he struggled for the first half of the season.
Never got benched.
Yeah.
In the South Florida, didn't play in the South Florida game at all. So once they figured out, okay, here are the things he can't do. Let's stop trying those.
Right.
Let's just stick with the things he can do. Milroe got much better. And then you see everything you hear with Kalen DeBoer and his staff, they're going to totally build this offense around Milroe's skill set.
Right.
So you got Milroe. And you've got Brady Cook at Missouri who's back. There's not a lot of guys that are back, though. I mean, obviously, Quinn Ewers at Texas. But there's a big glut of quarterbacks who are very unproven that are going to get starts in the SEC this year.
I mean, roughly half the league or a third of the league has unproven quarterbacks this year.
So here's Chris Lowe talking about, I guess, quarterbacks who are the most trustworthy in his mind out of all the unproven guys.
I don't know, because that's a good question. I think probably just from a pure arm talent standpoint, Iomaliave at Tennessee is probably the most talented. But, we other than the Iowa game and the bowl game last year, we haven't seen him play. Jackson Arnold played in the bowl game last year, made some mistakes for Oklahoma, but put up big numbers. I know, again, in talking to Shane and people around that program, they're really excited about what Sellers could do. I talked to a couple of the kids in Dallas, a couple of the players, and his ability to run the football and extend plays and his arm strength. I think, was the other one LSU Nussmeier? Is that who you mentioned?
Oh, did not. We can throw LSU in there, too.
Yeah, Kentucky. I think you said, Vandegrift.
Kentucky has a transfer, Vandegrift from Georgia, another guy who's going to be a first-year starter. So, listen, it's a quarterback's game now more than ever. And you've got to have that guy that, especially at a school that doesn't have the kind of personnel that can line up and just knock you off football, Georgia, Alabama, Texas. You got to be able to find ways to move the ball, hit some explosive plays downfield, do some different types of things. And I think that's going to be critical for all those guys that we just mentioned. And how do they play around them? You look at Tennessee. Tennessee has lost some really good receivers the last few years. They feel like they have good depth at receiver, but I don't know that you point to any one guy on their roster and say he's Jalen Hyatt. Or he's a breakout. He's one of the kids that LSU had last year. So much of it is we talk about quarterbacks. It is a quarterback game, but how do you protect them? Can you take some pressure off that quarterback's shoulders by running the football some, especially in the red zone? And I think the third thing is you've got to you got to play well around them. Guys have got to make plays and catch a ball out in space. Break a tackle, turn a 7-8 yard gain into a 25-yard gain. And I think, Carolina's certainly got to be able to do more of that.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting how this whole thing plays out with these quarterbacks in the SEC. And like we said, if you look at it, where this is at, you go through the league, there's so many quarterbacks, you just don't know. You just don't know. I mean, Arkansas is bringing in the kid Green from Boise State. Auburn, I mean, Peyton Thorne didn't do anything to make it go wow last year. Everybody's blaming it on the offensive coordinator that was let go, Phil Montgomery. Oh, we got rid of Phil Montgomery. Everything's going to be great now. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, Graham Mertz had a really nice year, and no one's talking about it at Florida. So he's a returning veteran. But so far, you've got Arkansas. You've got Kentucky with Blake Vandegrift. You've got LSU moving Nussmeier up, who's looked good in the time he has played. But again, now it's his show. Mississippi State. I mean, Blake Sharpen from his time at Baylor. Oklahoma with Jackson Arnold. I forgot Jackson Dart at Ole Miss is a grizzled veteran these days. You have Sellers. You have Nico at Tennessee. Wegman at A&M was playing really well last year before he got hurt. So it's a real mismatch of there's some veteran guys coming back. Some of these guys you have confidence in. Some are like, really? You're bringing back Peyton Thorne? But you do have a lot of unknown. I think Tyler said with half the league. Let's see, Arkansas, Kentucky, LSU, Mississippi State, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee. 7 teams roughly who are, throw Vanderbilt in the mix too, I guess. A lot of teams in this league, roughly half, have question marks at quarterback. Even if they know who's starting, they got a question mark to see in regard to what they're going to do. So the quarterback deal, look, everybody loves Nico's arm talent at Tennessee. He was a 20-star recruit, making all that money just to go to Tennessee through NIL. And in the bowl game, Iowa, their defense wasn't at 100%, but still, Nico and Tennessee pretty much diced the Hawkeyes. Heck, if you score 7 points, you diced the Hawkeyes last year. So a lot of folks out of all these new quarterbacks, new shiny quarterbacks, many people point at Nico. But, Sellers has a ton of physical ability too. And in the few moments we saw him in games last year or in the spring game, it didn't look like the moment was going to be too big for him. And last year was against, wasn't against elite competition, but he did give you hope, and he showed his potential and high ceiling. Now you got to do it game in and game out against much tougher dudes on the other side of the ball. But Sellers does have the physical ability. Vandergriff at Kentucky's a former 5-star recruit, couldn't get on the field at Georgia. So he's like, screw this, I want to go where I can go play. Jackson Arnold was a 5-star kid at Oklahoma. Again, that bowl game, well, one good throw, one bad throw. One, hey, great job. 2, oh my God, I can't believe he did that. So we'll see where it goes with Jackson Arnold, but a lot of ability. A lot. So we'll see where all of it goes. It's a very interesting mix of quarterbacks. Everybody loves Carson Beck, obviously. Quinn Ewers, they're looked at as, and Jalen Milroe looked at as the top 3 quarterbacks. Like I said, Graham Mertz had a nice year, and nobody talks about it because, look at Florida. But we'll see where this whole thing goes quarterback-wise in the SEC. And there's Chris Lowe talking about the most trustworthy of the unproven quarterbacks. All right, we're doing football in the 1 o'clock hour. Coming up will be our Firehouse Sub. Text the hour at 803-404-6100. We still have a few craft beer cards. We have a few left, but they're almost all gone. $30 a brewery, 12 craft beer locations. It's a $360 value. You can get it for only $79. Go to 1075thegame.com and click on Sweet Deals. And one other thing real quick before I forget. Rosewood Avenue, the Hardee's location on Rosewood this Saturday, 2 to 4. Tyler will be there. You stop by, bring some school supplies for Richlands 1 and Richlands 2. And if you bring stuff during our time out there on Saturday, you will get a little card for a 3-piece chicken tender meal. But it's when we're there. Not 3 days later and you show up and go, hey, man, give me a chicken tender coupon. Now, while we're there, if you show up and say hey to Tyler between 2 and 4 on Saturday at the Hardee's location on Rosewood, and you bring some school supplies, you get yourself a little card. Go get yourself a chicken tender meal.
Might have to see if I can finagle one of those coupons myself.
Supplies.
That sounds pretty good.
Just bring school supplies.
So it applies for me too?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
You're okay. You can do it. Bring some school stuff. It might be a notebook you have that you never used laying around the house.
I wasn't too keen on using them in school, so why not?
All right, so that's coming up on Saturday. Tyler will be there 2 to 4. Again, the Hardee's location on Rosewood. We'll come back. Our Firehouse Sub. Text the hour 803-404-6100. And you know what? Let's hear from the Big Ten Commission if we have time. Tony Petiti. You know what the Big Ten is focused on? The Big 18. Halftime show. Terry Ford, Tyler Head on the game. Time for our Firehouse Sub Text the hour at 803-404-6100. What you got there, Tyler?
Yeah, Mike weighs in. He says, Pat is an amazing on Monday Night Raw as a commentator. I agree. I think, which, here's the thing. Everything in wrestling is over the top anyway. So McAfee's personality fits perfectly with what professional wrestling is. And I agree. I think he's phenomenal in that role. He's a more entertaining Jerry Lawler, if that makes sense.
It does. I like that. Look, I like McAfee. I think he's got a really good personality. He can be funny, And again, the wrestling thing is perfect.
Yeah, it is. And he can say some dumb things sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch the show on TV on ESPN, every now and then you'll go,
wouldn't have gone there, but okay.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Or, Pat, I believe you are totally incorrect on that whole thing. And then one of his guys will correct him or whatever.
Nobody bats 1,000.
Right. None of us do. But it's just, I think there's a place for him on game day.
Sure.
As a regular member of game day, I just think you have to, especially these first few years when you're getting an audience used to a guy who's totally different.
Right.
Someone's got to step back and not just say, okay, just put him on the set and let him roll. I think you got to have more of a strategy with McAfee.
Roll with me here. Pat's Frat of the Week. Goes to a different frat house at every single college game day location, highlights their tailgating setup, whatever their scene is. I think that'd be perfect. Like that's his demographic.
Wheelhouse.
Is the frat bros, right?
Absolutely. I mean, he has dude wipes on his set on the ESPN
He's got a lot of things on his set.
Yes. I do. I think that I like him. I think some of the criticism was a little unfair, but we went over why. There's just some people who don't like new things.
Yeah.
When you're used to something, you don't like something new. Well, and then you have a new guy who's totally different than anything you're used to.
I think it's also worth noting, and when McAfee was on the fence about coming back or not, Herbstreit was like, if you don't come back, like, I don't want to be on the show anymore. Like, the people on the show legitimately enjoy working with him.
Yeah, I think everything you hear or see, he comes off as a likable dude. He's not like a egomaniac diva or anything like that.
Sure.
He comes off as a guy, man, I wouldn't mind cracking a beer and shooting a crap with that guy.
Right.
And Herbstreit to say that, and I'm glad you brought that up, that says something.
Mm-hmm.
Because now that Lee Corso, again, the health issues that have come along in these last so many years, Herbstreit's like the heartbeat of the show.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
He's like the guy now. He's got the seniority.
Right.
And so if he's like, hey, look, McAfee's not here, I'm not here either, that should carry a lot of weight with a lot of people who make the decisions as well.
Sure.
And, yeah, look, I thought some of the moves they make to take some people off of there, I like David Pollock.
I did too. When it came to X's and O's, I thought Pollock was probably the best one at that.
Yeah. Look, Pollock's beliefs and everything, I don't care.
Sure.
I don't care. I'm just talking about him on the show on game day. I liked Pollock on game day. I thought he was good.
Yeah.
I really did. And so that was a shame. And there were some people who liked Pollock who looked at, you traded McAfee for Pollock.
Right.
Now, I don't think that's true either. But there were people who weren't very happy about that because they liked David Pollock.
Right.
And remember, Pat McAfee, NFL guy. David Pollock, where did he play?
Georgia.
What conference is that in?
SEC.
So I think that was a little bit part of it too. Was the Pollock? McAfee's collateral damage because of Pollock.
Right.
And I think that there is a spot for McAfee to be a regular guy on that show. I just don't know if you have him sitting there picking games or sitting there trying to give his thoughts on, the Boise State Air Force game.
Sure.
And stuff like that. I don't know. I just think there's a lot there to keep McAfee. Just put him in the right position to succeed.
Right.
Don't make him like, hey, we can make him like Lee Corso. No, he's not Lee Corso. He's not Kirk Herbstreit. I almost call him Herb Kirkstreet. What was that? But I do think there's something there for McAfee. I'm glad he's coming back.
Yeah.
What the heck? All right. We appreciate the text like always, 803-404-6100. We probably don't have time for our boy from the Big Ten, do we?
I will hit that with what's trending at 2.
Yeah, and I will be back after you do what's trending at 2. And then I'll come back when you're done with what's trending at 2.
Sounds good.
That sound like a plan?
Yeah.
I like that.
Roll with that.
What the heck? And look, we appreciate you if you're listening here in Columbia at 107.5 The Game, 100.3 The Game Myrtle Beach, 100.5 The Game in Florence. Whether you're on our 107.5 The Game app, you can get that, Google Play, iTunes. I mean, if you're watching on the Game TV, that is at the Game TV Radio, our YouTube channel, powered by Integrated Media, sponsored by Shepherd's Glass. Whatever way you're digging the game, no matter where, we thank you very much. We appreciate you. Tyler will take you through what's trending at 2, and then I'll come back and yip with you in about 2:30 here on the Game. There it is. Ah, the sound of music. And what's trending at 2, part of it is the Olympics are here. It's coming.
Which they've started before the opening ceremonies.
That happens every now and then.
Kind of odd.
Yeah. Also, we kind of focus a little bit more on the baseball world as the Braves look like they're safely in the playoffs. It feels like, unless they crater, but they're still chasing the Phillies, who have the best record in baseball. What's trending at 2 next here on the Game?
2 o'clock, welcome back in. It is the halftime show here on The Game. Tyler Head along with you. Terry Ford will be back in here with me in just a little bit. It is time for what is trending at 2. And if you're wondering what's going on with the Braves right now as they're playing the postponed game from last night against the Reds. Braves currently down 9-4 in the top of the 5th inning as they're looking for only their second win since the resumption of baseball after the All-Star break. Got that win against St. Louis on Friday night, but two straight losses to the Cardinals, then a loss to the Reds in Game 1 of the series. Not off to the best start for the second half of Major League Baseball season. A lot of that obviously had to do with the injuries that the Braves have been suffering, and losing Ozzie Albies the other day, Fried apparently got tweaked a little bit in the All-Star game last week. You're already down Acuna, already down Spencer Strider. Things looking a little rough for the Braves right now. And since they returned from the All-Star break, the starting pitching and just pitching in general has been very rough. And Alex Winos on the mound today for the Braves only went 2 2/3, came up 6 hits and 7 runs with 2 walks and just 3 strikeouts, surrendered 2 home runs in that time. So the Braves just really, really struggling to get their footing on the mound, especially here after the All-Star break. We talked about this a little bit at the end of the last hour there. We didn't get a chance to get to the quote from Tony Petitti, but Big Ten Media Days are rolling along out in Indianapolis as the league gets set for its new expanded Big Ten with 18 teams in the fold now, which is going to be very interesting to see how all that plays out. Of course, welcoming in the new schools from Oregon and Washington and then Southern Cal as well as UCLA. Tony Petitti, when he took to the podium yesterday, kind of similar to what Greg Sankey said last week at SEC Media Days, said they're focused on the number of schools they have as of right now.
Yeah, so the first question, I would say, I think it's pretty clear when you look at the schedule that we've talked about unveiling here about the strength and depth of what we're doing. I think the fit of the 4 is across. Obviously, we're here to talk about football. But when you go beyond that, for our Presidents and Chancellors, the academic fit is really important if you look at the strength in all other sports that the 4 new members bring. So it's a complete match across many different factors. That's what made the decision to add Oregon, Washington, which was done by my staff, and then the decision that Kevin Warren and his staff did to add USC, UCLA. So I see great strength across matchups, the footprint that we'll have going forward. I think we've got to get a lot of things right, but I feel really good about the way we're positioned for the future in terms of the health and strength of the conference. With regard to the second part of your question about just the future, look, we're focused on the 18 right now. That's what we're focused on. We had to do a lot of work. A lot of work had been done to integrate USC, UCLA. We started that work over immediately when we added Oregon and Washington. So I think we're really comfortable where we are. We've got to get this conference right, and that's what our focus is.
So for those reading between the lines, there's your wink, wink, nod, nod at Florida State and Clemson, who are desperately trying to leave the ACC. And in an ideal world for them, they would love to be able to land in a place like the Big Ten and the SEC, where the payouts are essentially double what they're making in the ACC as of right now. But that's the 2 conference commissioners of those respective conferences shooting that down, at least for right now, saying they're focused on what they have and are not in a mad rush to try and expand their respective conferences, which means that if, and I say if because I still don't believe that they can do it, and I'll believe it when I see it, I guess, that if Florida State and Clemson were able to get out of the ACC, their best landing spot is the Big 12, which, as we've talked about, based on the way their TV deal is structured, you have the upside potential of making more money, but it's still going to pale in comparison to what you have, in the SEC and the Big 10, which, again, is why they're wanting to go to those places, but they don't seem interested as of right now in adding them. And Petitti, in talking about those schools that are coming in, to the Big Ten this year, did make sure to emphasize that they are all AAU accredited universities, which Florida State and Clemson are not. And look, academics vary in importance conference by conference. The Big Ten holds their institutions in very high regard. They want you to be a part of the AAU, and that is can often be a deal breaker on whether you enter the conference or not. So again, Clemson and Florida State, not AAU accredited universities, and a lot of other things working against them in terms of trying to find their way into the Big Ten. Ryan Day spoke yesterday. Really the only notable coach in the Big Ten that spoke yesterday. I know Ferentz speaking today. Not Dan Lanning's either today or tomorrow, one of these days. And we'll get some stuff from them whenever we come across it. But Ryan Day spoke yesterday, and of course, the entire focus of the Big Ten is seemingly on what Ohio State's going to be able to do this year. And he talked a little bit about the expectations that are being placed on his shoulders this year at Ohio State.
Our focus is on this preseason. It's the next step. And, sure, a lot of coaches will say it. You can't really, focus on what happened the year before. You can't get too worried about what's coming down the road. But we all know there's a lot of, noise and a lot of hype around this team. And what we can't do is, let those distractions, grab our focus from what we need to do day in and day out. We know it's going to be a long season, but we got to have a great preseason. We got to have a physical preseason. We got to lay that foundation for what's going to come as we head throughout the season. But we're very, very excited about our guys. We have great experience in that locker room and some great talent. But it's going to take more than talent. It's going to take all the no-talent issues to get to where we want to be and reach our goals.
And those goals this year for Ohio State, I think the bar is at making the national championship game. I know that's a crazy high bar to set, especially within, so many unknowns of the 12-team college football playoff format and seedings and draws and all that kind of stuff. But when you look at what Ohio State has on its roster this year, there might not be a more talented team in all of college football. And they made sure of that because last year, 11-1, missed the conference championship game, went into the the Cotton Bowl and had no interest and ended up losing to Missouri. But they made sure. Ryan Day, pounded the pavement for people to donate to the collective so they could go out there and make sure they had the best team that they could possibly have. And that isn't only talking about the transfer portal, that's also in retaining guys as well, which I think is an underrated aspect of what this team is. They got Travion Henderson. They got Emeka Egbuka, who could have gone to the NFL. They returned almost all their starters on defense as well. Like they have a good team in just the guys that were on the team last year that came back. But then you add into the mix a Will Howard at quarterback, coming over from Kansas State, where he won a Big 12 title a couple years ago. Quinshon Judkins, who's been the best running back in the SEC the past couple of years. Caleb Downs, who was a phenomenal safety for Alabama in his freshman year last season, to name a few. Like, they've loaded up this roster. They're in win now mode. When we talk about, like the Rams a couple years ago in the NFL, who put all their chips in the middle of the table to win a Super Bowl when the Braves made all the moves to the trade deadline back in 2021. They were going all in to win that year. And that's exactly what Ryan Day and Ohio State are doing, is going all in to ensure that they win this year. But with all that talent, with that expectation of going to the national championship game, the biggest hurdle they got to get past is that team to the north. That team, of course, being the Michigan Wolverines. Ryan Day speaking yesterday about his current losing streak that he has against Michigan.
One of the biggest, struggles that we have is that, when you lose a game like that, you have to wait a whole nother year to get back into that game. And, for our guys who decided to come back, we had about 12 guys that made the decision to come back. That was one of the big reasons why they decided to come back. But what we have to do is build every day and grow every day and count on the work that we're doing on a daily basis that's going to matter as we get to the end of the season. And, what we can't do is get too far ahead of ourselves and start to focus too much on that and get distracted. That's just the bottom line. But when you come to Ohio State, you got to win that game.
So Paul Feinbaum, I heard those comments yesterday from Ryan Day, and he had some scathing things to say in reference to that when he made an appearance on First Take yesterday.
Molly, I have no idea what he's talking about. I mean, he's lost that game 3 years in a row, and he's talking about how his players are motivated to come back and play. Well, I heard that 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and last year, and you stunk in all 3 games. I mean, what are you talking about? And here's the problem with talking about Ryan Day. You look at his record, and I'm sure Doggy will quote it, and Stephen A. will quote it. It's gaudy. Nobody has a record like him, except you can't choke the biggest game of the year. And to me, if he can't beat Michigan Michigan this year when he's got probably the best team in the country along with Georgia, after Harbaugh leaves, after all those great players depart, after a national championship, he ought to be gone. I mean, that is, it's simple as that. That's the biggest game of the year in the Big Ten. And I realize that Ohio State played for a national championship a couple years ago against Alabama. Well, only lost by 28 points. They've been to the playoffs, but that program hasn't won a national championship since 2014 when Urban Meyer was there. So quit making excuses, Ryan Day. Quit acting like your players have given up something to come back. 3 years ago they came back, 2 years ago they came back, and 1 year ago they came back, and it's been the same result. Versus the last 3 games against Michigan.
I said this earlier. It would be insane to think that a coach that is 56-8 overall, that has made the national championship, made multiple college football playoff appearances, won a couple Big Ten championships, that coach would even be in the realm of talking about job security. But if you can't beat Michigan again, if you lose, especially now that Jim Harbaugh's gone, like, Harbaugh's a great coach, right? And I think most people would agree he's probably a better overall coach than Ryan Day. So him getting over on Ryan Day 3 years in a row, even though they're ready to fire him a couple years back because he couldn't win the Ohio State game, things shifted in his favor, and now he's obviously gone back to the NFL after winning the national championship and hands the keys over to Sherrone Moore, who, yes, technically was the coach of the game last year, but that was still Harbaugh's team and Harbaugh's game plan the whole 9 yards. If he can't beat Sherrone Moore this year, and again, they fail to make the national championship, I'm not saying I advocate for it, but I wouldn't be surprised if those people up there in Columbus said, you know what? We need to do something different at head coach. Again, it's an insane thought to have, but that's how much that game alone means to those people up there. It's insanity. Brian Day, again, Michigan's had his number. And as Paul Feinbaum said, more often than not in those games the past couple of years, hadn't really looked competitive. Didn't look like they were in the same stratosphere as Michigan at times in those games. Will that change this year? I would lean towards probably. Again, I think Michigan or Ohio State is just too talented, too good to lose that game again. Especially with Michigan's got a fine roster, but they are going to be retooling a bit from the national championship a year ago. So things should swing back in the favor of Ohio State, but oh boy, if they lose that week number or that last game of the regular season, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in Columbus after that. I'll just leave it at that. Speaking of the end of the season, college football playoff, 12 teams. We've talked about quite a bit so far in this show. One bowl being a little difficult. Let's dive into that next. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Terry Ford will be back in here with me shortly on your Wednesday on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you, Terry Ford. We'll be back in here in just a few minutes. We'll hit Greatest Day in the History of the World coming up at 2:30. Looking for a Braves update. They are still trailing the Reds 9-4 in the going into the sixth inning now out in Atlanta. Nacho Alvarez was just at the plate. Of course, he just made his debut with the Braves a couple days ago. The bases were loaded, and he went down swinging. So the Braves still stay at a 9-4 disadvantage. Nacho now, I think, if I'm doing this correctly, 1 of 8 so far in his Braves tenure. So not off to the hottest start just yet for Nacho Alvarez. Got a single a little bit earlier on in the game, but did strike out there with the bases loaded. I want to continue talking about the college football playoff. And again, we touched on this earlier with, the retroactive look on what the playoff would have been like if it had been a 12-team going back to 2014. How many SEC schools would have been in, which I think in a lot of years, it was surprising to see how few would have been in, considering kind of our thought process that routinely the SEC should be able to get, 4, 5, 6 teams in every single year or something like that, which won't be the norm, certainly. But something else that popped up yesterday in relation to the college football playoff, it has to do with the Rose Bowl. And look, the Rose Bowl is the premier bowl game, right? The granddaddy of them all, all that stuff that surround the Rose Bowl. But it's no different than any of these other bowl games over the past 10 years where their importance has diminished, right? Now, the Rose Bowl being a part of the college football playoff rotation means that every 3 years it got to be a semifinal like it was this past year between Michigan and, and Alabama. And with the way the college football playoff was structured with 4 teams, semifinals taking place on or around New Year's Day, it allowed the Rose Bowl to keep its coveted January 1st, 2 o'clock Pacific time kickoff. But with the new 12-team playoff, and what the original plan was to rotate the 6 New Year's 6 bowl games between being quarterfinals and semifinals, it was going to present the opportunity for the Rose Bowl to be played the second week in January every third year, starting in 2026. So it would be the third year of the 12-team playoff. Well, the Rose Bowl has now requested to the college football playoff to keep their January 1st date and preferably that kickoff time as well. What this does, and by the way, the Rose Bowl is very confident that this wish will be granted. But what this does is in already an era where bowls have been devalued quite a bit. And yes, bowls being a part of the college football playoff is a big deal, but they are merely stepping stones to getting the national championship. They are not the be-all, end-all destination like they once were. So even being a part of the playoffs, they have diminished in value over the years. Now, if you're the Rose Bowl, who again is proclaiming itself and always has been to be the best bowl game out there, the most prestigious, all that kind of stuff, by locking yourself into being on January the 1st every single year, you are forfeiting your ability to be a semifinal game. If this happens, if they grant this to them, the Rose Bowl will always be a quarterfinal game in the college football playoff. And for the pomp and circumstance of your January 1st date and the Tournament of Roses parade and all that kind of stuff, fine. But in terms of what you actually mean in importance level to the playoff, well, you just became a second-tier bowl in that regard. Because if we're just talking about bowl games, the most important ones are going to be the ones that are semifinals, right? Because that's your last step to get the national championship. One step behind them is going to be the quarterfinals. And if you're the Rose Bowl, instead of biting the bullet every 3 years and saying, okay, we'll play a game on January the 7th or whatever it may be, you were so dead set on keeping that tradition of January 1st that you're willingly trying to devalue your bowl game even more than I felt like it already was by forfeiting your right to be a semifinal bowl. And what this also does is it kind of screws up the rotation because now it's going to be an uneven amount of teams or an uneven shift with the other bowls and how they are semifinals. Because it was going to be a 2x2x2 rotation where, all right, this year it's the Orange and Cotton Bowl. Next year, it's Peach and Fiesta. And then 3 years from now, it was supposed to be Rose and Sugar as semifinals. Well, now they got to find a replacement for the Rose Bowl. So, like the Orange Bowl or Fiesta Bowl or something like that's going to get an extra semifinal game, which, I'm sure that produces different revenue streams and that kind of stuff for that specific bowl that throws it off for the rest of the bowls in the rotation. So, again, it's very convoluted, very complicated, and it's not the first time that the Rose Bowl has caused issues when it comes to the college football national championship format. Go back to the early 90s when you had the Bowl Coalition and the Bowl Alliance, whose objective was to try and pit together the number 1 and number 2 teams in the country in a bowl game to try and determine a true on-the-field national champion. Well, there were several years there where, because of their ties to the Big Ten and the Pac-12, Pac-10 back at that point in time, the Rose Bowl refused to let one of their teams out of the game if they were number 1 or number 2 to go and play in a different bowl game to determine a national championship. The BCS, they almost didn't want to join that as well because they didn't want to give up that precious tie to the Big Ten and the Pac-12, Pac-10, whatever we're calling it back then. Even with the new college football playoff, the Rose Bowl was one of the last ones to sign on because they were so afraid of that coveted slot. And because of that time slot that they have on January the 1st, that means that the Sugar Bowl, which has been the semifinal game that goes on after it, doesn't start until like 9:30, and then we're up until 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning watching the semifinal game because the Rose Bowl won't budge off of its traditional start. You know what I mean? And just in general, when we talk about the bowl system, it really doesn't have a place in a playoff format. Look, I love bowls. I've always loved bowls. I watch all the bowls that I can. But if we were creating the 12-team playoff from scratch, from the ground up, bowls would have no place in them because they're just neutral site games at this point in time. Again, they've lost their prestige of what they used to mean. Is it cool to get a trip to Miami? Yeah. But your ultimate destination is 2-3 games after that. You know what I mean? Like, they're just stepping stones now, which, again, with the money and everything tied up in bowl games, I get why they still exist. And I don't know if college football is ever going to move on from them. But especially with the ability to now play home games in higher-seeded venues, I would much, much rather know I'm playing for the opportunity to host a playoff game at Williams-Brice Stadium as opposed to, okay, well, if we make the playoff, then, first round games at home, but then we got to go to Dallas, then we got to go to Arizona or whatever it may be. Like, I just much prefer to see all the things run through home venues instead, but I think we're a long way off from that. And again, what issues this causes by the Rose Bowl trying to stick to its date, I don't know. We'll see. I'm sure this is not the last we've heard of this saga between the Rose Bowl and the 12-team college football playoff. Today is July the 24th, right at a month away from week 0, official start of college football. It's also the greatest day in the history of the world. With that coming up, it is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Terry Ford will be back in here in just a minute on your Wednesday on the game.
Hey, how'd it go? How'd that what's trending at 2 go?
Huh, not bad at all.
Historic?
Got a little Tony Petitti slid in there as subtle shade at Florida State and Clemson that they're not interested in bringing in any new schools, which, when you talk about an 18-team league, I too would want to kind of feel that out for a little while, see how things are going before I even considered expanding past that.
Yeah, the thing that's interesting, real quick, we'll get to today in sports history, the greatest day in the history of the world, which is, July 24th. But here's my thing. I truly believe that neither the Big Ten nor the SEC are interested. I believe that is true. But you have to say that anyway because there's this legal thing where you can't be tampering with those schools anyway until they declare they're leaving.
Yeah. Well,
now, we both know that's kind of BS. We know that there's tampering all the time.
We do, and you don't have to specifically say, yes, we're exploring Florida State and Clemson, but you can, if you were legitimately interested in expanding, you would say, we're at 18 right now, but you know what? We're leaving our options open. That insinuates, hey, there's possibility this is on the horizon, but I look at what Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey said these past 2 weeks. I don't see any opening in any word of their statements.
I don't think they are interested. I don't. And everything we've heard, they're not. Because really, they don't have to be.
Sure.
I mean, we've said this before. The SEC, if they're going to expand, they want to go to places that there already aren't.
Right. Like
North Carolina, possibly Virginia. Now, the interesting thing is neither North Carolina nor Virginia meet what Greg Sankey says that one of the ADs said we should have this litmus test, and it just means more.
Right.
Football doesn't mean more at the University of North Carolina, the University of Virginia. You know what means more than football? Basketball.
Yep.
Basketball just means more.
Like Virginia Tech's probably the one school out of those two possible states that you could say, yeah, the football, and they got the environment up there at Lane Stadium. Like you could say that kind of passes the smell test for the SEC, but that's probably about it as far as football goes.
Yeah, I mean, Virginia Tech is more of a culture fit football-wise to the SEC than Virginia.
Sure.
But so the idea is if the SEC is going somewhere, they're probably going in the state of North Carolina, fastest growing state in the country. Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, the Triangle, fastest growing region in the country.
Yep.
And then why the SEC would like to get in the state of Virginia is, what's really close to the state of Virginia?
D.C.
Yep, a top 10 market, D.C.
But everybody in D.C.'s watching Maryland football, right?
Oh, absolutely they are. What can be honest with you? They're not watching University of Virginia or the University of Maryland. They're watching the Baltimore Ravens and the Washington football team.
I imagine when you ask most people in the state of Maryland, hey, what do you think about the Terps? The who?
Oh, the basketball team? Well,
yeah.
When are they playing? I mean, and when it comes to college sports there, it's basketball in that area. It's not football. Remember, the ACC was a basketball league.
Right.
Not a football league. So, but the point is, if you are going to expand, if you're going by the criteria, it just means more. At North Carolina and Virginia, football doesn't mean more. Basketball does. So when you say that as Greg Sankey, you have a besides Vanderbilt, you have a bunch of schools where football means a ton.
Yes.
So yeah, your mission statement works with what you have now. So I go back to the other question is, do you really want to expand? Because like we said, you want to expand to Florida State, you got Florida already. You want to get Clemson, you already got South Carolina. So Tony Petitti taking the shot at Florida, and really Florida State is hurting itself, and they really don't even understand that. There's such a lack of self-awareness coming out of Tallahassee.
Florida State is the guy that cannot wait to break up with his girlfriend because he thinks the hot cheerleader is going to be into him, only to find out she has no interest, and guess what? Now you're single.
And you have the girl you had? She's over you.
And by the way, the girl that you had is also telling all the other girls in the school about how terrible of a person you are to where they're not going to be interested either.
Or they've watched you be a terrible person to that girl.
Yeah.
So why do they want to be with you? Because you've been terrible to that girl. Why, you want to be the next girl they're terrible to? No. And so I think Tony Petitti, Greg Sankey, both in very subtle ways have made it known. Sankey we're concentrating on our 16. Petitti we're concentrating on our 18. And we said this yesterday about Florida State and Clemson regarding the Big Ten. They have one major problem. They're not research schools.
And Petitti also referenced that yesterday with Oregon, Washington to California schools, we're so happy to bring in these AAU accredited universities.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that matters in the Big Ten. So, again, Tony Petitti, like Greg Sankey, saying, for right now, we're good. We're good. And really, like, Clemson has not made nowhere near the noise Florida State has. Clemson, to their credit, has handled this more kind of on the down lowish compared to Florida State.
Mm-hmm.
Florida State's jumping up and down, throwing a fit like my youngest when he was like 4.
Right.
And he was out of goldfish. And it's not a good look. It's really not a good look, especially when the two places you want to go, they don't need you.
Right.
They really don't. So, I'm glad you got that in on what's trending at 2. Good job. All right, greatest day in the history of the world, sponsored by 1-800-GOT-JUNK on this day in 19... I had to go do something. I should have had you grab this highlight.
Oh, I'm way ahead of you.
You have it?
I've never seen this.
I never have either.
I don't know what they're measuring. They might be going to call George Brett out.
Well, he's out.
Yes, sir.
Brett is out. Look at this. Brett is out. And
he's steaming mad.
He is out and having to be forcibly restrained from hitting plate umpire Tim McClellan.
Excellent work by you, sir. This is really the best thing to talk about today in the greatest day in the history of the world.
Exactly.
And if you've never... All right, well, let's explain this. This day in 1983, George Brett, Hall of Fame third baseman, Kansas City Royals, facing, I believe it was Goose Gossage in the 9th inning for the New York Yankees.
That's correct.
Brett takes Gossage yard, a 2-run homer. Kansas City was down 4-3. They're now ahead 5-4. Billy Martin, the manager of the Yankees. Say what you want about Billy Martin. Billy Martin was a heck of a manager. Billy Martin had been waiting and waiting and waiting. He had noticed that George Brett, the pine tar, was really high up on Brett's bat.
Right.
And Martin was waiting for the right moment because Martin knew the rules. This was the right moment. Martin went to Tim McClellan, the home plate umpire, and the crew chief of the umpiring crew, and pointed out the amount of pine tar on Brett's bat. Umpires got together, agreed with Martin, and the greatest part of this entire highlight is the shot of Brett in the dugout. McClellan looks over at the Kansas City dugout, rings Brett out.
And he loses his mind.
Brett is insane with anger. His eyes, they look like Jim Carrey in The Mask, don't they? His eyeballs get gigantic. He comes flying out of the dugout. You heard on the play-by-play call there. I'm telling you, if they don't stop him, Brett picks up his bat covered in pine tar and beats Tim McClellan to death.
Probably. I mean, it took 3 umpires and about half the Royals to restrain him.
Brett was going to kill him. There is no doubt in my mind. If Brett gets a hold of him, to this day, there are pieces of Tim McClellan that they have not found.
Probably.
Brett was like, the anger is just shooting out of his face as he's running at the home plate umpire, Tim McClellan. But this doesn't stop now. This continues. So, the Royals protest, and in those days, if you don't pay attention to baseball or weren't following baseball in those days, you had American League presidents and National League presidents. Basically, they ran the leagues, and you had the commissioner who ran the game of baseball, who the presidents would, again, they reported to the commissioner. Sure. But they ran their leagues.
Sure.
So the Royals protested to the American League president, who was Lee MacPhail. And MacPhail overruled the umpires and ruled in favor of the Royals. The game resumes on August 18th with Kansas City leading 5-4, and the Royals win the game.
Wow.
All that, and the Royals win the game. Now, I'm going to give Billy Martin a ton of credit. Martin knew Brett and how much pine tar Brett put on his bat, and Martin hadn't said a word for a while.
He had the card in his back pocket.
He's just waiting. He was just waiting, and that was the perfect time to pull the card. And Martin, in his mind, if you looked at the rules, the pine tar on Brett's bat was at an illegal distance up the bat.
Mm-hmm.
But Royals protested. Lee MacPhail, the AL president, overruled it. Game resumed with Kansas City leading 5-4, and the Royals get the win. It's craziness. That thing was craziness. If you get bored, you can YouTube it because how phenomenal is Brett?
By the way, 13.2 million views on MLB's YouTube page for that.
Just watching Brett. That's all you need to see. You just need to see Brett come out of the dugout. Brett is going to kill someone.
I think that's the definition of hair on fire.
And didn't he have some chew? Did he have chew in his mouth on that? I can't remember. I don't know if he had a little chew in his jaw or not, but his face, you could have cooked burgers on his face. He was so mad. So mad.
Yeah, it looks like he's got a hammer in.
Yeah. So that made it even better because he's got the chew, I think it was in the right side of his mouth, and that just made it look better.
The most impressive part is he goes from sitting on the bench to being in a full sprint in like 8 feet. Like I don't think his feet touched the ground from leaving the bench to being on the field. Like he touched no other part of the dugout.
It's like he was shot out of a cannon. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong.
So mad. And that's really the best thing today, the greatest day in the history of the world. On this day in 1983, the Pine Tar incident. All right, we'll get back in here. Firehouse Sub Text the Hour. We'll try to yip a little bit with Jay and Elijah. Post-game show's coming up at 3. Terry Ford, Tyler Head here on the game. Get to our Firehouse Sub text the hour at 803-446-100 in a minute. Also, our little handoff thing sponsored by Little Pigs, Alpine Street, Alpine Road. It's Alpine Road, right? Thank you. Jay's here. Tyler's here. Elijah and Jay will do the post-game show here in a few minutes. Busy day tomorrow here on our little radio station, 9 to noon. Gamecock Central will take over the Firehouse Sub at 2805B, not A, 2805B. I don't know what's at A.
Well, just look for Lexington Medical Center. We're right across the street.
Right across the street, Firehouse Sub.
I've accidentally ordered subs at that restaurant instead of the one down the street from my house.
Oops.
By accident.
How'd
but
that
it's
go?
not that far of a drive.
Okay, so you've been there.
I've been there. Accidentally, but been there.
So that's where Gamecock Central and Tyler will take over the Firehouse Sub. Thank our buddy Larry, like always, from Firehouse. That's 9 to noon. Then noon to about 4-ish, we'll be hanging out in at Cobblestone. Birdies with Beamer. We'll start off with the halftime show. Jay and Elijah will jump in at 3 or come on early if we're talking to coaches. Hey, feel free.
Yeah, we're in the process of literally figuring that out.
Yeah, it's a logistical, because we like to have coaches on, and we have Shane, and it's always fun. So we'll be doing that noon to 4-ish. Shane will speak to the media around 4, right? Isn't that what it is?
Correct.
So then we'll carry that live, obviously.
The golf won't take that long because they'll play. This isn't one of those like 6-hour golf outings.
Like shotgun start 11:30
well, and again,
whatever.
it's the classic par is your friend. So nobody's out there making double bogeys or looking for their ball in the woods.
No, Gunner's playing. So this might take a lot longer than we think. So. But, yeah, so that's tomorrow. So we'll be all over the place tomorrow. 9 to noon in Lexington, Firehouse Sub, right across from Lex Med. Then at Cobblestone in Blythewood for the Birdies with Beamer. Hang out there. And we're going to get a lot. Like, first of all, Shane talks SEC Media Days. Mm-hmm. Shane talks to the local media at SEC Media Days, to the national guys. Mm-hmm. Comes up and hangs out with us for a few minutes. Mm-hmm. Now he's going to do Birdies with Beamer. Do you think we're going to get any breaking news tomorrow?
No. I don't think so.
Let me ask you this:
if we do, that'd be cool.
That would be great,
I don't anticipate it.
Do you think he'll officially name Sellers the starting quarterback?
No.
Camp thing.
How about you? I don't think so.
I mean,
they're going to competition.
Hasn't he already done?
They're going to let it play out.
Yeah, but we know. Well, we know though, right?
Yeah,
we know. We know what's in the words of Jay Phillips. We know what's up.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Yeah, I feel so too.
But hey, look, I'm here for competition. I'm here for the story. That's what we do. I'm here for the story.
We want things to talk about.
I mean, I don't want
things to talk
I don't want, like drama.
Yeah, you do. You're a drama queen, my friend.
There are times when I want drama.
You are a drama queen.
I'm not sure that this is one of them.
So that'll be tomorrow. We'll have Shane.
Yeah, I'm not sure drama queen is really how I would describe myself.
Don't you think so?
I think agent for chaos.
Yeah,
maybe
that makes him sound more manly.
As I say, I'm very self-aware. I don't know though that I am.
I like agent
Confessions
of
a sports media drama queen.
But I'm here.
It doesn't have the same flow.
I'm here for. I'm here for the story. That's what we do.
I like. What was that? An agent for what?
Agent for chaos.
I like.
Tell your daughters that we refer to you as a drama queen and see what they say.
They agree.
No, I the thing about me is typically I roll along pretty nicely, but if you rankle me in some way, it vaults up like exponentially, and then it comes. I'm more like a spewing volcano.
Okay, don't ruffle your feathers, is what you're saying.
I'll be honest though, Mount St. J is fun every now and then.
Every once in a while, it's cathartic. I think every once in a while, I clearly must need it. I don't go to therapy or anything.
That might be your therapy.
Well, I probably should.
I don't think I've seen a full explosion.
It's been a while.
Yeah, we had a couple. We had a couple during when we were doing this noon to 3. You had a couple.
There's a couple. I mean, it happens. It happens.
Every now and then, Jay he'll get sideways.
Yeah. I mean,
it's so rare.
Some dude recently almost got me going, and then he a caller, and then he pulled back, and it was
my favorite one was him though, Tyler. I'll tell you, and I love him. And some guy was arguing with him about Allman Brothers being a jam band.
Yeah, jam band.
And this was social media. This wasn't on the air, and he is like losing his mind.
Like the Rick Springfield rocker thing, right?
That was fun, though.
That one was. This wasn't as bad. This guy just clearly he took offense to the term jam band and thinks that jam bands are some kind of like just grungy hippie dudes that all they do is
All
smoke weed
stoned,
and
right.
just, and because he said they're not a jam band, they're Southern rock. And I was like, bro, they can be both, and they are.
Yeah.
It's not even up for debate.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
and so
I mean, you can be a Southern. Widespread Panic is from Athens, Georgia. They're a Southern rock jam band. That's okay.
And that went on the whole show, by
The
the way,
Allman
Tyler.
Brothers are from Jacksonville, Florida. They're a Southern rock jam band,
He's
and
got
that's
going again.
okay. But this guy, they're Southern rock. Don't dare call them a jam band. They're not a jam band. I was like, dude.
Well, there's your preview on today's postgame
Yeah,
show.
well, and I said to the guy, I was like, well, I got a 21-minute Elizabeth Reed from New York City in 1971 that's going to argue with you until the cows come home.
Jay, today perhaps you can rant about what's wrong with the Braves.
The Braves just, dude, they're hurt.
They're beat up.
They're getting
when you
beat
got
today.
guys getting hurt warming up, taking ground balls.
Yeah, Whit Merrifield joins the Braves. He's there for like 30 minutes, and I haven't seen the picture, but I've seen his description of it. Mm-hmm. He had to get stitches like under his fingernail, man. That sounds like torture.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. How many times do you take ground balls?
Every day
About a billion.
since he was,
Right.
6.
You just have that year, man, where
It's
you're like the
just-
drummer from Spinal Tap.
Yeah, just blowing up behind the,
You know what I
the
mean?
kit. So there it is. Speaking of blowing up, we will start the postgame show with breaking news around college athletics.
All right, cool.
So we got a lot to do.
Yeah, so you have an actual show to do now, 3 to 6.
Yeah, there's breaking. It's actually could be transformative.
Nice. All right, that's Jay and Elijah breaking news from college football next. Tyler, nice job. Halftime show again tomorrow. See ya.